Educating, informing, serving. Fact TV, keeping government honest.
Before, we pretty much gut the building, provide minimal but some structural repairs, and complete new finishes on the inside of the building. There is known to be some asbestos in the building, so we've carried a line item for that abatement. And then I've created a line item for tenant fit up. The number above the $2,000,004 does not include any specialty equipment for a restaurant or similar. But if we wanted to add a restaurant, full kitchen, I've included that in the $250,000. I'm not including brewery equipment because I think it could be a nano brewery. It could be, we don't know. So I haven't included that, anticipating that if it was a brewery, the brewery people would either buy their own brewery equipment and or it would be funded some ways else. But that's just the concept for now. That can change depending on your input. As we move down the page, we have soft costs, and essentially the first segment is historic preservation specialist. A lot of the fund sources that we'll get into on the top require a lot of specialists, and one of those will probably be a historic preservationist. So we've carried some money for that. Next line item would be architectural, mechanical, electric, plumbing, and structural engineering. Certain reimbursables, primarily travel and printing, and then a civil engineer to accommodate the work around the outside of the building. Then as we move further down the page, we have additional soft costs, folks, geotech fees, because of the nature of the site, a railroad, where Jack and I are intimately familiar with railroad properties. We helped build a lot of buildings in the city of Keene Railroad land. But at any rate, we'll have to have a geotech to double check the building integrity. Environmental review, that's an upfront cost. I'm sure that most of the funders will require a phase 1 and phase 2 environmental review. That line item is there to accommodate that pre-purchase. Hazardous material consulting is a specialist to essentially write out a plan, get DES approval, and monitor the any hazardous material abatement, i.e. particularly asbestos. We have some money in there for landscape design, legal fees for purchase, capital campaign, and an owner's project manager. Then lastly, as we move down the page, we have some additional soft costs: building permit, builder's risk insurance, material testing, electrical service to the site, and then finally, next page. We have data included in the budget, owner furnishings and equipment, commissioning for the MVP system, a line item for debt service. Lastly, we've included some things that folks may not be used to, but it will correlate back up to the funding sources at the top. We've included some operating reserves, some grant administration expenses, and then finally a developer fee. And I'm going to let Jack explain that when his time comes up. And then finally, we have $130,000 contingency at the bottom. This is in addition to a 10% contingency already in the construction number. So essentially there's $300 and some odd thousand of contingency built into the project cost. Before I move out of cost, does anybody have a question on, and I know this is a lot of information in a real hurry, but does anybody have questions on that so far?
I don't.
I do too. One of them, going back up to the property acquisition, did you say that it's not 100,000, it's 265?
Right, but there's sources in that because some of that is going to come from USDA and some of it's going to come from, we're asking for 75 from
right, but
taxpayers.
There's the number under acquisition.
Right, so
It's
that
not
number.
100, it's 265.
It's 230.
235.
235.
Right.
Okay, so that changes that section of acquisition significantly. Okay, that was my question.
Right.
Wade had a question.
I just wanted to, I'm just curious, what's capital campaign council?
That would be somebody to work for you to pursue funding, and or if you have a capital campaign, in other words, you reach out to the community to help raise money, and or donors.
Okay.
All of these line items are suggestions and open for discussion, but we're trying to cover all the bases.
Anyone
Matt,
else?
sorry.
Make sure there weren't any other questions from the trustees. Jigs online, did you have
The-
one? Jack?
The question I had, it seemed interesting that there was a debt service number. So I don't know if that's cost during construction or whatever. I don't know. But
In a lot of cases, there's a bridge loan required. Not all of your money comes in at once. In other words, you don't always start the project with everything in the bank.
Yeah.
And so that 50,000 is an identification of the potential for debt service. It's rare that you can fully avoid it. That 50,000 doesn't represent full debt service. In other words, if you borrow 4 million, it represents some 500 to maybe $1 million of the whole cost to accommodate that period of time.
okay. Yep.
Makes sense?
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. So here's the good stuff. I did all the bad stuff, the cost stuff, and now Jack's going to talk about all the good stuff, how we get funding. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Steve. Excuse me. This is Jamie Barrett. Before we move on, just looking at this list, I'm a resident of Bellows Falls. I'm looking at has waste removal at 50,000. But if you go down to the consulting fees and all the others, which is around 152,005 as it scrolls, you've got hazardous materials, consulting, environmental review, the borings, the surveys. So if that hasn't been done yet, where does the figure of 50,000 for hazardous material removal come from?
Jamie, it's a guesstimate based on some early environmental reviews. There's a bunch of things going on in that. I think you said 152,000. I haven't added it up, but there's multiple tasks happening, not just the hazmat abatement, but for instance, the geotech fees have a lot to do with the structural capacity of the building and what it's sitting on down below. And it's not all about hazmat, for instance. The environmental review line item is all about buying the property. Banks won't buy, for instance, banks won't allow people to buy property unless they have a phase 1 and phase 2. And because of our potential funding sources up top, they're pretty stringent about funding any project that they don't know what's happening inside that. So that's what that's all for, is to provide them with reports from a third party that will allow them to fund the project. The hazmat materials consulting, that's a little overstated perhaps. Probably the abatement, the asbestos abatement is in the realm of 10 or 15,000 for a project of that size, but we have extra money in there in case we didn't come across some other material unknown at this time that we would have to deal with. So that's what that's all about.
Understood, but I'm just asking the question so we know that up front, as we've had other areas in the village that we've looked at renovating, landscape redesign, where we've run into, almost Brownsfield type things when we're talking about boring. We're not talking the building and an abatement alone of asbestos removal. We're looking at surrounding areas around. knowing the history of the railroad, right? So just important to have that out there up front. I appreciate it.
No, I think it's a really good conversation, and I want to elaborate on. I think it's a great question you make, and it gives me an opportunity to elaborate. So, what the thinking so far, Jamie, is that as you say, brownfield. The brownfield regs are such that we'll start at the minimal. If you don't impact the site, if you don't disturb the site, then the practice today is to leave everything where it is. I mean, that's the philosophy. If we do impact the site, i.e. excavate around the building for some reason, we're allowed to leave the material that's there, unless it's above the standards allowed by regulation, i.e. high VOCs or something like that have potential health hazards. Right now, the plan is very minimal impact around the building. We may want to repair a bulkhead on the outside. Presumably, that dirt that we dig up to repair the bulkhead and rework the foundation around the bulkhead, we'll put back in the hole. We won't haul it away. That's what they prefer to do, as long as it's not stupidly contaminated. And then the brownfield regs allow for 3.5 inches of paving as a cap, 4 inches of concrete, or 2 feet of gravel, and or 6 inches along with fabric occasionally as a cap over whatever material is there on site, and you don't have to, and you can leave it there. You don't have to haul it away. The exception to all that rule is if for some reason we discover that there's crazy hazardous material there, and that may bring up all kinds of different things, but that's not anticipated at this time. So it's anticipated that it would be brownfield material, and we'll be able to keep the majority of it, if not all of it, on site. So does that help explain it a little bit?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your information.
Yeah, and I know that didn't come out as crystal clear as I would have liked to have it, but that's a summary of the brownfields in 3 minutes or less. So now can we go to the top, Matt, please? And Jack, you're up.
Hey, thanks, Steve. So I want to first start off by thanking Gary for all his help in that. You have a great resource there, and he pointed me in a lot of good directions to track down information on several of these funding programs. Ultimately, the goal here was to assemble as many grant and tax credit programs as we could, so that there'd be little or no debt service associated with the project. And I think in a very short time, I think we've zeroed in on a number of programs that, if we're successful pursuing these programs when the project moves forward, that there will be little or no debt service required for the property. So what I wanted to do was start at the very top, and the first funding source is the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, and we have put in a $500,000 block grant. Again, Gary and I had a conversation with some folks at the state's community development office that runs the block grant program, and they, at least initially, really liked the project and encouraged us to move forward. So we put in a $500,000 figure there. The second grant is through VTRAN, and it's a Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Grant, or CRISI, as people refer to it. And we've penciled in $1,750,000 for that. That grant is specifically aimed at helping, obviously, rail infrastructure and bringing back infrastructure necessary to expand rail service. Third is Northern Borders Regional Commission, NBRC. They have 2 rounds of funding, or two different types of funding rounds every year. But we thought it was appropriate to put in 500,000. Again, that's a grant. And then we get into some interesting funding sources. The first one listed is a federal historic tax credit. So the federal government has a program where what they do is they make tax credits available to projects that involve substantial rehabilitation to certified historic structures, structures that are on the National Register or structures that are in a contributing historic district that's been accepted by the federal government. The tax credits are equal to 20% of pretty much all of the project with the exception of purchase price. When you get those tax credits, and if you're trying to do the quick math here, you'll see that 608,000 is not 20% of everything minus the purchase. And that's because the tax credits are actually allocated to an investor who buys the tax credits over a 5-year period. So they buy the tax credits at a discount. And I've used 80 cents on the dollar here to come up with that $608,343 amount that would be net to the project. It's an interesting program. It does contribute to the question that was asked earlier about the debt service number further down the page in the uses of funds, because the historic tax credit investor does not invest the full $608,000 when the project starts. They actually invest about 25% of that amount at closing, and then over the course of the construction project, and then after the certificate of occupancy is received, is when they put in the balance of their money. So there's a space in time where we would need to borrow some money to cover that shortfall in funds. It's usually an interest-only loan, so it doesn't chew up a lot of revenue. But again, it's a good idea to plug in a debt service number in the uses. The next line item, this is related to the federal historic tax credits, and that the basis for the tax credits is pretty much the same thing, but this is actually through the state of Vermont. They have a 10% historic tax credit, and it's also based on 10% of pretty much the entire project with the exception of the purchase. It's a little bit different in that they'll give you the full 10% on the first $500,000 of a project, but then anything over $500,000, they'll give you 10% based on 50% of that additional amount. So what the calculations tell me is that would net to the project about $172,000. A couple of smaller programs, Vermont Historic Preservation Grant and the Preservation Trust of Vermont. We have penciled in $20,000 from each of those. And then pretty much a catch-all line item that we have some work to address still. That's miscellaneous grants, donations, and hopefully not any loans. But examples of these miscellaneous grants, for example, the folks who run the Community Development Block Grant Program in Vermont, they have a planning grant, and it's a rolling application. So I know there was some questions about how to come up with the funds necessary to do some of this pre-development work. They had $60,000 available on a rolling application for a planning grant, and that would go a long way to address some of those initial requirements. The folks who become partners in this project, and there's different ways they can partner, but they do have to be a partner to buy the tax credits and invest money in the projects. Those are the same folks who may be willing to put in some additional investment because this project is located in a federally designated opportunity zone. It's probably not big enough for most investors, but again, if there's a gap amount at the end and a bank or an insurance company who's buying the tax credits would like to help the project just a bit more, they probably could be talked into making an investment through the Opportunity Fund. The USDA has a community facilities grant program. So there's a number of again, relatively speaking, smaller grants and donations that I think we could recruit to satisfy that 474,000 gap. You add it all up, $4,044,000 in potential sources matches the $4,044,000 in uses.
What next are you on mute?
So if there's any questions about any of that, please
I'm crazy.
speak up.
All amounts.
Not a question, Jack, but you broke up, but I know what you were saying, and that was that we balanced this budget to be break even. In other words, the sources pays for the uses. And we'll have to change the budget tomorrow to identify the property acquisition new amount, but we will also then adjust the sources to accommodate that.
That's right.
You know,
But the intention is to balance the costs against the sources to be break even. And that brings us to the final discussion point tonight, at least, and that is that we want to cover quickly potential operating costs. I know Gary and Jack have had this conversation, but Jack, could you just do a quick highlight on that, please?
Yeah, in my previous life, I ran a regional development corporation in the southwestern part of the state, and over the 30 years that I ran the organization, we developed over $100 million of properties, and what we learned through my tenure there was the best way to have a tenant is to offer a lease that's known as a true net lease. So many of you are familiar with terms like triple net, single net, double net, but this is what's known as a true net lease. So what you do, and what I would suggest in a situation like this is you offer a very competitive, more than competitive basic lease rate. But then in the lease document, you make your tenants responsible for every cost associated with occupying that building. In other words, they pay when the plumber comes and has to unclog a drain. They pay the taxes. They pay the electricity. They pay for basic maintenance and renovation. So they're responsible for everything. All you get, if it's done right, is a check every month for that basic lease rate, which is your money to keep. It's not that uncommon, as I say, as it evolved in the Monadnock region over the 30 years I was there. We stopped doing anything but true net leases about a decade ago. And anyway, it's a good way to go because first of all, you don't have to worry about, and I shared this experience with Gary on the phone a couple of days ago, of a tenant putting an ice block on top of a thermostat so that they can jack their heat up if you are paying for the heat. We can avoid situations like that, but also just the capacity of the entity that would own this organization. Again, you want to focus on community development and economic development, not necessarily, as I said, unclogging a drain or fixing a window or anything related to the day-to-day property management.
Thanks, Jack. Tons of information. Just to be clear about the information that we've presented so far. This is very preliminary. It is, gives you a sense of the magnitude of the project. Line items are bound to vary some, but this will give the folks here at the meeting a real good idea of what the project would cost and ultimately what it would look like.
Questions? It's all speculative, so.
Right, I guess the only thing that I'll mention, just, I think from a timing standpoint and why I think it was important to move this process along, the Chrissy grants are somewhat, I think, newer source of funds. And I believe, Gary, those are July, I think, is that correct, for the applications for those?
Yeah, so the Chrissy grants, the federal infrastructure grants, what was just over $1 trillion that was just passed last fall, at the end of the fall, those have to come through the state. So the state applies for those funds for all of their rail projects. And for them to, they will submit that grant in the November, December timeline. But in order for us to be included, they need the information from us so that so that we are a competitive part of their application. So that the 1,750,000 that's in there, they have the details from us. They see that we're shovel ready as of July. We own the building. The phase 1 environmental is happening right now concurrently with the feasibility study. The team with Banwell Architects and Steve and Jack are doing thorough work. So their work is, as Steve said, is at the beginning phases, but by the end of the process, when we turn the materials into V-Trans, they have a due diligence. They have a thorough picture of what we're applying for. And so that's the one grant that is a pretty sure thing. It's part of the whole Vermont rail package that comes through the state. So anyway, that's we really wanted to get these details in front of everyone now, be able to go to town meeting with the general sense of the picture, so we can inform voters what they're really looking at.
So I'd like to ask, the acquisition piece, which has come before the rest of this does, how much money are the taxpayers going to be paying of that $252,500?
$75,000 if they vote for it on March 1st.
And all the rest of the money, that includes the purchase option, the rest of the property acquisition, the closing costs, the real estate transfer tax, we paid by what?
USDA Community Facilities Grant for $50,000 and Downtown Transportation Fund Grant for $200,000. And it's also, there's some immediate work that Matt actually scoped out some divisions for those repairs. And when Steve was talking about some of the foundation work, there is some critical work that will be done as soon as the town owns the building. It is included in the grant funding.
It's in the budget.
It's in the, right, but you just quoted me two numbers that comes to $250,000, which is almost all of the acquisition costs, but you're planning to take out of that 250, the difference, and
So there's,
taxpayers will pay
yeah,
$75,000.
there's $200,000 from the DTF, $50,000 from the community facilities, and $75,000 from the taxpayers.
The taxpayers. That comes to 325.
Yes.
So that would that's supposed to cover site work and
No. Site work is after. So
Well,
the acquisition and the foundation work is July, August, September, and then there's the project development, which are the grant applications, the planning funds, taking the project to construction level design. So there's a lot of design and engineering that happens, and the grant applications, there's easily a year worth of work there. So the site work will come in when we're ready to go to construction, which is a ways away. 1 to 2 years, I would say. Steve probably has a best sense of timing on that, but any thoughts on that, Steve? Timing to construction?
It all depends on funding sources, but the duration of construction, Gary, is that your question?
No, between the acquisition and doing the pre-development work, design and engineering, and getting to a point where we would break ground for.
I'll speak for Matt initially, but once the acquisition, if you proceed, and once the acquisition is completed, and we have the go-ahead to start design, I think we're looking at probably 4 to 5 months to complete that, Matt. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yep. That's a good guess.
And that would, if all that happened this spring, then I think we would be looking at a late fall construction start in rough calendar timelines, which isn't all bad. It's usually a lot easier to find people in the winter to work than it is in the summer. And because we don't have a lot of outside work, I think that would work pretty well on this project to start in November or December of this year if everything comes together. I would say that's an optimistic path with funding and the timelines that a lot of these organizations need to give approvals and to provide actual funding. So until we have a more concrete handle on, and no pun intended there, on their timelines, that's a very optimistic schedule, starting construction late fall, I think, based on the funding sources that we're looking at. But if they come through, it's definitely worth the wait.
Stephen had a question.
Yeah, in the drawing and the plan that you showed earlier when you initiated conversation here, there was a conversation of the topic of the canopy. Is that cost involved here too?
Yes, there's actually, I have an estimate for the construction breakdown, but that canopy is in the construction cost line item. Yes.
Thank you.
Did you have someone?
I got 2 questions.
Okay. I just want to check if you have something.
I'd like to. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, ask your
Oh,
question.
wait, go ahead.
Well, if you ask, then I might not have to ask. one.
I'm just going to make a statement, which is, I want to thank the presenters and also just say that I think this is a fantastic opportunity for the village, for our community, particularly on the heels of losing 2 buildings. I think that we have a real opportunity here to make a significant contribution long-term to our community. And it's this opportunity.
On matching funds from the town besides before. Is there anything available? Matching.
Okay, go ahead, Wade.
So I have 2 questions. I think one's for Jack and probably one for Gary, but my first question is.
Wait a second. Jakes, can you guys? Okay, hold on. Okay, now go ahead. Thank you. Scott muted you for the moment because we can hear the both of you. Because of that conversation, we cannot hear anyone else in this room talking. So wait, resume.
I just had 2 questions. Follow up to the Chrissy grant, the 1.75 million. Is that the maximum amount that we can apply for?
No.
No.
So as the work goes forward, and the feasibility plan is fleshed out, it's possible that could be more. But there is a balance between how much the state applies for to cover all of their projects statewide, and so that's taken into account.
But that number there is kind of like accurate for starters. I mean,
I think it's a good starting point.
My other question is, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, I think it might go to Jack. So on these net lease agreements that you talked about that have been around for 10 years now, so on a project like this, what would be a rough amount that would be anticipated, like that we would net on a monthly basis?
Well, that's a hard one, but I'm not all that familiar with your rental market there, but from what I understand, lease rates in your area range from, maybe $8 to $10 for industrial or warehouse space, and maybe from 10 to 15 for more finished space. I think I'm in the ballpark. Gary, am I in the ballpark there?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the 10 to 15 for finished space.
Yeah. So the balancing act then to achieve here is you want to offer an attractive base lease to a company to come in and in this proposal, as it's outlined, to run the nano brewery in the restaurant. So the idea would be, that this is very preliminary, but you offer them a lease rate easily sub for finished out space, again, with the provision that they're responsible for everything associated with living in that space. So it kind of depends on how much you want a tenant. If we have no debt service, you have greater flexibility, obviously. But how much you want a tenant, you can offer even a more attractive lease rate. But again, the thing to stick to your guns about is that tenant, in addition to that base lease rate, pays for every other expense associated with operating within that space.
Thank you.
Maybe you want to put jigs on.
Yeah, I was just gonna make one more comment, and
Yeah.
I'll make sure that we get Jigs back so that he's not muted, but in the grander scheme, and Gary and I were talking about this briefly, we've been trying to allocate as much activity in his time and my time towards that redevelopment of the island and trying to find ways that we can find other funding sources to help us. And so if you think about it, if we're able to successfully get the off-alignment bridge and those connections completed, potentially this project at the train station and the Bellows Bridge, you're looking at roughly $30 million worth of investment in our basic downtown infrastructure, the vast majority of that coming from other funding sources. So I think Jeff was pointing out that these are real historic opportunities for us, and it's kind of a unique time. And if all of those things can come together in a reasonably short period of time, that's a real shot in the arm for our community, and hopefully that springboards us towards other types of investors and success. So those are the things I think that we've been trying to focus on, and that's part of the message when we talk to people, because these are big numbers and everybody gets nervous when you start talking about 4 million here and 8 million there and 17 million. But the vast majority of that investment's coming from other sources. So for us, it's an exciting opportunity if this all comes together. That's a tremendous amount of investment in our small little town for, hopefully setting us up for a nice future. With that, let me see if I can get
If
Jigs.
he has something to say.
All right, Jigs. I think, no, hang on. Oh, I unmuted you.
Here we go.
There you go.
I'm on mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're back.
Yep, you're
No.
on.
I agree. I think this is a terrific project. It's easy to get negative about nano breweries or whatever, but I think just the rehabilitation and positioning of this property is would be wonderful for our little town. So, I'm very excited about it.
And I just want to say, because I've been a naysayer, and I appreciate all the work that you gentlemen have done and everyone is doing. I'm concerned that the speculation of grant funding may not come through in all areas, and it will wind up falling upon the taxpayer. That's my concern. Net lease agreements sound great, but that might not happen here, especially if we have to be very agreeable to get someone, a permanent tenant in there. When we have the Robbie Paper Mill property is still sitting vacant, doing nothing. It has been undeveloped and hasn't been able to at this point attract a developer, and perhaps because of the things we still need to do, the Oppenheimer Bridge and the violence and all that, those might have an impact, perhaps. But again, we're using tiny words like if to say if these funds come through. We're dipping our hands into grant pots that everyone in our state and even federally are looking for. So we're all doing the same thing. There is a possibility that our community is hedging it and might wind up having to foot more of a bill. And I'm just concerned about our taxpayers who cannot afford to continue paying higher taxes. So that's my whole point, is just being careful about what we're doing and reducing the amount of money that our taxpayers will be burdened with. Despite the project, because other train stations have been purchased in the state of Vermont. No one has answered this question for me. V-Trans has purchased train stations and done renovation, and it's been run by nonprofits or other sources. Why is our small community compared to larger communities purchasing a train station? That question's never been answered. I'd like an answer.
Okay. So I just, those are all really good points, and it's, you're right to be, it's a lot of money to be concerned about the taxpayers. And so I just want to add some other pieces of due diligence that the town has done in this process that led up to hiring this team, working with this consulting team for the feasibility study. So the first thing, just so we're accurate, the Robertson paper site, it cannot be sold yet. We have the sign up so that it's people see it and know that there's an opportunity there. And of course, until other redevelopment happens, it's not as attractive. But the site cannot be sold or redeveloped until the certificate of completion is completed by the state. And so they're still working on that piece. They have some data points to get on the monitoring wells before they will sign off on that. And for the train station, the state purchased the White River Junction station because of some of the acreage around it was needed for the state's freight rail plan. And there's an individual, Byron, drawing a blank on his last name, but it's easy to see. You could Google it. But Byron, just an individual that owned the whole property, was not allowing that to be used as the state needed. So they purchased the station strictly to get control of that property around the station, freight property. So we have been working with the folks in charge of policy and planning for the rail division, and we are in their program for this. Like we've been working all along with the Wyndham Regional Commission, having our project on the STIP so that it's in this the State Transportation Improvement Plan. So that the funding is programmed. And in terms of why it's a rail division why it's a priority for the rail division, their current 5-year plan, they have a list of 50 priorities. And the very top one, the one that scored the most points in this 5-year plan, is to add another round trip to this Vermonter line. So that's number one, and it scored 98 out of 100 possible points. to implement that piece. And that comes right through Bellows Falls, doubles the rail service. The other projects that are rail related, there's the Valley Flyer, which goes from New Haven to Brattleboro, to Greenfield. As a demonstration projects met the numbers to be extended. And so also in the 5-year plan is to extend that service to White River Junction. So that'll make 3 round trip passenger trains per day, Bellows Falls, within that 5-year time frame. And for ridership, right now, Bellows Falls, there's 9 stations in Vermont, and the Vermonter, it does better than 4 of the stations and not as good as 4 of them. So like Burlington, White River, Brattleboro, all beat it out. And it's right in the middle, does pretty well, yeah. And so then the next one in the 5-year plan is passenger rail station improvements. So listed in that plan, which was developed 2 years ago to start this year, Montpelier, Bellows Falls, Brattleboro, Essex Junction are all listed on the Vermonter line for station improvements. So the way that you think about grants normally, it is a pretty fair risk to have almost $2 million on an infrastructure plan, but it is programmed into the 5-year rail plan. We have been coordinating all along with Wyndham Regional and the folks who apply for the grants and do the policy and planning for VTrans. So those are pretty secure in the regular scheme of things for funding. And there's about 5 other things on this rail plan that go towards. Also, Scott was talking about the bigger picture with the Vilas Bridge and the Depot Street Bridge. The other piece in the rail plan is to support where there is the possibility for transit-oriented development. So the area-wide plan that's coming up, that's all focused on the transit-oriented development and the vibrancy of a designated downtown. And so by the train station being a gateway to that development is another aspect that's high priority in this 5-year rail plan. So we hit, we tag every item that they're looking for to fund and build. So that's why it's much less of a risk than it appears, being so heavily grant funded.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
Just a quick question that kind of sort of relates to this, back to the Robbie Paper site.
Sure.
When is the projected deadline where they might sign off on it? Are we talking like a year or 2 years or?
Yeah, so there's a little bit more survey work that has to be done that they ask for based on they're not able to determine if some monitoring wells are on town property or Robertson property. So as soon as that the survey work is completed and those details get sent to them, and it takes months. It could be a half a year.
All right, as long as Jake doesn't have anything else, looks like we're done.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, Jamie Barrick again. So
Yeah.
For Mr. Fox, understanding the Robbie Paper site and everything, it's got a for sale sign. It can't be sold yet until the state signs off. Has there been any interest in that site? And understanding that, it's all based on further development and everything else, but has anybody reached out with interest?
Yeah, so there was a manufacturer ready to move in there, which we did some pre-development work with, and their product was culinary islands for resorts. So like when you see a Marriott in the islands and it has a kitchen bar outside on a rooftop, that was their product, and they were outgrowing their space in Brattleboro and had arranged between BDCC and BFADC for them to move into that Robertson Paper property. And when COVID hit, all of the resorts, the travel, that stuff all died. And instead of bursting at their seams, they were shrinking and struggling to stay in business. And so then the next company, there is an organization who's interested in it, who's building 5 different facilities across the country. And we're hopeful that they will take it and when the property is available and they sign on something, we would definitely publicize that and the details of it.
And just the last point, I appreciate everybody doing the presentation tonight. I know it's in the infancy and depending on grants, but I'm also concerned about the town and the village picking up more costs. So it's really based on getting a leasee in there that's willing to accept the terms of whatever that square footage for finished space is and taking on all the responsibility of maintenance and any issues that arise. And I think we've been down this road before, and maybe Mr. Pickup could answer this, but the Waypoint Center right now, on the tax burden and yearly costs of maintenance and upkeep on that, you know, what does that look like over the last 20 years, right? So that's all I've got, and I really appreciate everybody participating tonight.
I guess maybe the biggest challenge between the Waypoint and this project would be this space has always been intended to be a revenue generating space. I think the Waypoint space was always supposed to be a nonprofit, sort of a support the business community space. So there isn't really a cash flow coming from the chamber and the occupancy of that structure. So it's more of, you know, keeping a public presence and a place for people to come and get information and be, you know, hopefully introduced to other aspects of the community. This is more for leasable space, which will support the much smaller required waiting area and hopefully generate more activity in that part of the island, which, you know, can be kind of quiet during various times of the year. And so that's the other, you know, hope for benefit as well. So
I think the other piece is that, you know, a lot of this is just stitching together small projects that incrementally bring improvement to the town. And if we're afraid to invest in ourselves, how are we going to attract anybody to come here to do it? And that's been the history of what we've done. And we have a great opportunity to start doing something new. We know what happens from not doing anything. It's going to cost taxpayers more money to not develop it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, looks like we're done. And thank you, gentlemen, for all
thank
the
you,
work,
Ben. Well,
both here and
appreciate it, guys.
online.
All right,
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Jack.
thank you.
Hey,
Thanks. Moving on our agenda, we get to item number 4, resolution to remove the uncollected aged receivables.
So I gave you, since we last spoke about this, I gave you a brief update as to some of the items that you had raised previously. The one question about the $250 for fire alarms for the Moose, I think you can see the explanation that basically it was it really probably never should have been recorded as a potential, shouldn't have been billed because it wasn't anything that we should have been billing for based on the explanation for Pam. So it's really just wiping out. It was a debt that was not ever incurred, at least by them. You can see that there was a history there. We pulled alarms. For some reason, they got billed. And again, at that point, we were issuing refunds to people. So they never paid because there was nothing to pay. And we didn't have to issue them a refund, but for some reason, that $250 is there for an extended period. The other items, as we talked, you can see we've changed some of our billing practices so that some of those items in green that were previously related to utility issues won't be a problem because there's a way that we're going to be able to capture that money on an active account going forward. The last one, which Deb has been questioning and I've been trying to get some additional information to her and we'll share with the rest of the board, was the C&J portable question. It was a limited liability corporation was set up through the state of Vermont. It has not been active for at least 5 years, I believe. And there is no current assets within the liability corporation. So the question that Deb raised is, can we go after an individual or an officer and attach that to them based on the debt that was incurred through the limited liability corporation? According to just a brief review by Ray's office, yes, you can. You run into two concerns with that. First of all, the cost of going after somebody legally, because the attorneys will not obviously pursue it for free, so you'll have to spend some money. And then the question really becomes what type of attachment or what type of mechanism you can ultimately gain to be able to get your $2,845. Basically, the practice of most of these septic companies, they tend to come and, they have a rolling billing cycle. We bill them monthly, but they come in throughout various periods of each of the months. So as you can see, even on this receivables report at the time that it was run, one of our larger customers owes 2 months. But it's not unusual for that to occur, and then they catch up, and then they have another 2-month cycle and they catch up. So in those cases, that's not an unusual type of situation. But in this case, that unfortunately what ended up happening was they went out of business and there is no real assets to attach to the corporation.
Right, and they went out of business a few years ago, and I guess my basic consideration here is that there seems to be no policy to pursue this, that we don't have one in place, perhaps administratively, to pursue debt of this type. And I can tell you as a business owner, if my business owed anything and I went out of business, I can tell you the IRS would be right after my assets for anything that was owed. And I'm not talking necessarily for your case, I mean, the business's case, the municipality, that we need to necessarily go legally after these people. We haven't even done so much as a 58-cent stamp to request the $2,800 that is owed over the last 2 years. Of course, there was a previous finance director in place who did pursue these things, but I believe that administratively, we need policies to pursue these things so they don't become this old and we're at the point of telling taxpayers, well, we're gonna write their stuff off, but you're still gonna pay the difference, or users fees for water or sewer. I simply believe that we have not had, and perhaps under your administration, we will have policies to deal with these issues.
Well, luckily, the finance director is sitting right to my
I
right.
know.
So
Yes.
she has been, she has been, and as we talk about some of the budget issues tonight, you'll see that there's a host of items that she has been aggressively pursuing. This is another one of those, is to be more consistent in our practices about how we do collections, how we do follow-ups, and then ultimately being able to track that so that she, again, has some overall dashboard of where we have trouble points. In the case of the septic issues, I can't speak about, the 5 years or what the intervening years, but that's our plan to go forward. So
let me ask though, because I see, looking at that line there in reference to these septic haulers, et cetera, whether it be Saxon River, whoever, District 5 or Best Septic. Is that usually customary or?
most of them are because of the billing cycles, the way that they occur, it'll be 30 to 60 days before we get payments.
Okay.
So it's not normal to have somebody like a C&J where we just go out of business.
Yeah, but they've been here for a while and they don't have any 60 or 90, so they do pay their bills.
Right, yeah, they do. Right. And paying their bills, our friends at the Westminster District 5 did pay us half of the current owed bill. So we are 50% of the way towards being fully paid.
Do you have any idea when we will see the updated
The other
contract?
50%?
No, well,
Oh.
the updated contract. Yeah, I know you can't tell me that.
Right.
But the updated contract that would change the way we're being paid currently.
And since our last conversation that we spoke about, some of our guidance from our attorney, we're working on some of the language. So I'll be coming back to you with that hopefully shortly.
Okay, so say March, sometime in March.
I'm hopeful, yeah.
Okay. So we are here at this, did we vote to get rid of these?
You had
debts?
asked me to try to do some work and follow up and come back, so that was a month ago, so we're
Yeah.
coming back.
So great to see that the green stuff is going to want to be handled another way. On A or B there. But, I wasn't trying to be dogged about C. I don't know these people. I didn't
Right.
know them when they were here,
Oh,
or
they-
didn't pay attention to the debt at the time. But over time, and I've done a lot of bookkeeping over my years, not just my business, but other people's. And I did everything I could to pursue debt. Now, didn't work for a municipality. Well, I did. 20 years ago. But doing that and making sure that we can do everything to it could, to get back the taxpayers' expectations or user fees. So what are we gonna do? What do you want to do with that, Scott? Or?
I think, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jason.
I think, Deborah, you're raising good points. I think what comes to my mind is, for example, you mentioned septage, people with these trucks coming in and doing their thing. I think it appears to me that the way we handle that is everybody's the same. And I think where that needs to be looked at is that if some person that's got porta potties wants to dump in our place, we may put them on a COD basis. If you're gonna dump, you're gonna have to, until you establish a record with us and can show financial statements or something, it's a COD basis. And I think, my impression is that everybody's treated the same, that the expectation is that they will dump their stuff, we'll send them a bill and they'll pay the bill. And again, in a perfect world, that's the way it works. But this is not a perfect world. And I think rather trying to go, hire lawyers to go after past transgressions or whatever, I think the focus ought to be going forward and how we bill for certain things. I mentioned the septage, but there could be other areas where we've had to write off receivables where we may not want to treat every single customer the same way. So anyway, but as far as this thing here, I agree that I thought we did vote to go ahead and write them off. And if we didn't, I'll make the motion to do that now.
So what are we writing off now? Because the items under 5170000 go up.
I would suggest that
Section
maybe
B is going to be removed.
correct. So really you're voting on the $250, which is under A,
Yeah.
and the 2008 2443, which is under C.
Okay,
B
so
has been-
go from there, Jace. You're gonna make a motion.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Need a second.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? I clearly don't agree. Remember, we will move this, but, we'll have to take a voice vote. So, all those in favor, Jeff,
Jeff Dunbar, aye. Stephen Golick, aye.
Deborah Wright, nay.
Wade Mashar, aye.
Jigs,
Jim McAuliffe, aye.
you have your,
Aye.
And I'll make sure when we have our budget conversations about water and sewer, that we'll talk a little more in detail about some of our practices and maybe some things that we can look towards that might hopefully eliminate this problem in the future. Because I'm not happy writing off septic either.
yeah, and we can clearly see that the $250 was not an issue. No skin off our nose, that
It
kind of thing.
wasn't right.
The 2,800, yes.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't throw that in the street, so.
Nope.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on. Number 5 is the general fund budget review.
Yeah, so again, I think we handed out copies.
Yep.
Yes.
Is that?
The problem is I'm not sure how you can get a copy to Jake since he's in Florida at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
Jake, are you anywhere near your computer?
No.
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 Okay.
The
So I
budget
can-
numbers you didn't wind up
I
getting.
can send you some
Got 'em.
stuff, but I'll make sure I send it to you after we have this conversation, so
Okay,
we'll update it from there, but I'll make sure that I send it to you.
Just our initial,
Right, and this is, again, this is not our finished product, but we wanted to at least get the conversation started because there have been, as Alyssa has been working through a variety of issues, I think the board has been frustrated for a while now with the allocations, right? And one of the things that Alyssa has been doing is going backwards and trying to find out places where we were not allocating expenses properly, either between water, sewer, police and fire and general fund within village accounts
oh,
or
yeah.
town and village or
All of them.
employee benefits, which I know has been an issue that this board has questioned over time and gotten various responses that maybe they weren't really happy with. So a lot of time and energy has been spent going through those particular items. And I think in this first cut of the general fund, I think you'll see that there's been some areas where we have highlighted some of the things that might have changed or that we were doing allocations. And again, it sort of reverts back to the conversations that we've been having for a period of time. So maybe with that as an introduction, you want to just sort of jump into some of the highlighted areas, Alyssa?
Sure. So this is just for the general fund, even though everything else is sort of there too.
Yeah, don't look ahead. It's like in school. You can't look ahead. Right?
Turn the page.
Come on.
You can't look towards the back. You gotta stay.
So most everything is pretty general, interest on, current taxes and penalties. If we're coming in anywhere near close to what has been budgeted, I'm just sort of sticking with that for right now. To put a number in there, if we want to change anything, we can certainly do that. I did raise the interest for delinquent taxes because it's been consistently higher than the 2,000, so I gave a little bit more there. I do have a question about the bank interest. There seems to be some allocation. I'm assuming that it's coming from the bank account that is.
It's a sweep account.
The
So.
sweep
Yeah, so
account.
how does that work? Is it divided between town and
Well,
village?
that's
That's why you
my
got that question there.
Right.
Because it's only $600 here.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't
So-
make any sense. Is it?
And then there's
the bank's like
15.
$1,200.
It was never
Both
really
entities.
allocated.
It was never actually done, but it's in here as revenue, so that's
Right.
why I'm questioning. And then the
That number seems to
sewer,
have just been,
So it's just a
Grabbed out of the
placement,
air.
a place
the
number.
sewer and the highway have 1,500, so
Doesn't make sense.
I know, I'm confused, so I don't
Right.
know if there was ever talk about who should get what and how it's shared.
How much is the actual interest? I mean, like say currently, this year, would be in our numbers, right?
Yeah.
So
No, not in yours.
it's not, no. Oh, so it's not in the budget paperwork you.
No, because it's in the
do you get that
town
monthly? Is that what you get, or is it a?
with the bank statements, yeah. So it's between 300 and 500 a
Yeah.
month, depending on whether or not there's a lot of tax money in there at
Right.
the time.
Oh, okay, 'cause, yeah, nothing's been.
Yeah, so I
Yeah,
think
it
it's
was
like
zero.
20,000, not 20,000.
6,000 or 7,000
Yeah,
a year.
yeah.
Right.
But I can just,
Odd.
I can find the account.
I think,
but each of, yeah, I mean, you don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, but if you run a balance sheet and you see who's got cash and who doesn't, then you would allocate it based on who's got cash and who doesn't, so. The sewer fund hasn't had cash for, we're finally close to break even, but certainly the water fund has a ton of cash, and I'm sure the village and the town accounts have cash, so that's where it should be allocated, is to those accounts that have cash.
that makes sense. We'll look at that and see if we can just do an allocation. It won't be perfect, but it'll be better than it was.
But it'll be better than nothing.
Correct, 'cause I think the $600 number, it doesn't tie back to any logical
right, well, is it a percentage?
Right.
Is it, I mean, it'd be nice if there was a set percent, so then it could just be
Right.
something that I do all the time, and that's the way it is.
All right, we'll work on that to tie back
Yeah.
the cash. We'll come back to that as we go forward.
We've got just under $3,000 so far this year.
I was gonna ask, is there a reason why you didn't plug in a, current tax received for 2023 yet? Or that's blank?
Because I have no idea what it is going to be.
We're still working on it.
Still working on the numbers, okay.
I don't know what to say there.
My only question on the police and fire revenue is that these are typically underperforming, and I think we overestimate or we speculate on what we expect to get. I think perhaps based upon real numbers, these numbers should be lowered. Only, I mean, it's realistic, right, to a realistic
Which I
number as
think
opposed to something that doesn't happen.
Dave,
Yeah, we're gonna work on,
Discuss.
right.
what he predicts for revenue for those things.
Right.
You can see a lot of the items are allocation related. You see a change in most of the numbers.
When we get into salaries and,
Under the finance
Okay.
office, the one thing I did want to talk about is we did put money in the budget to split between the town and the village I took money out of my budget for an administrative assistant, and we put money in the budget and a little bit more money for somebody to do personnel. I think one of the lessons that we learned with our last go around with a finance director / personnel director was we kind of got neither. And
Yeah.
in fairness to Alyssa, she has spent a lot of time dealing with our benefits and trying to get the program portions of the benefits corrected. But it really should be the focus of a person that does that continuously, right? So that they're always verifying our health insurance and our deductions and all the items that we're running into concerns about that the board had raised that are not getting done through the normal course of business. Plus any other types of things that, as you guys are well aware, in our world, we run into personnel related issues from time to time. And sometimes those personnel issues have cost us money and you know, we've run into issues. So that person, I think, can also help us with avoiding some of the problems that we have run into potentially in the past that we're trying to avoid. So that is a potentially new expenditure, really the only large expenditure change that we have in the entire budget. Under the office operations, a couple of things that we're still working on is the IT portion. Alyssa and I have spent some time. We have some proposals to see if there's another vendor that we might want to work with. I think we've had our ups and downs with Dominion Tech. The proposals that we're looking at aren't terribly different in terms of price. If we do make a decision to change, it's more just because I think we've sort of reached our maximum benefit with our current vendor, and maybe somebody new might be more motivated or might be a little more invigorated with our support.
that line item is lower though, because I think it's just been too high. I think the anticipation of having other things added into that IT support, that never happened.
Right.
So it's just been too high. So this is a
Well,
more.
there's also something else. Let me ask Jigs. Jigs,
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken, we did not agree to pay 50% of Dominion's tax bill. When we started this with the town, we are paying less than 50%. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. Well, it should be. I mean, it should be. Yeah.
We got, this is 3 years ago now, I think. We got the bill lower than what had originally been proposed on the village side, worked to get the bill lower. And so we made a motion to pay less than, I can't remember what it is, but it is less than 50%. So you might want to go back.
But I think looking at the allocation,
Yeah.
you know, whether the sewer and water should be paying 15%, whether the village should be paying 20%.
I know.
You know, I think it should be looked at. you know,
Yeah, because the way it was split was of 100%, we paid 50%, that's broken into what, 30? Is it 25,
It's 15, 15, and 20.
15, 15, and 20?
Right. Water, sewer, and then.
Okay, and
general,
that comes out
which
to
also includes
50%,
police.
yes, yeah.
Right.
And we only did that, less than 10 years ago, okay. It used to be all the government stuff was paid by the government, we
Right.
didn't split it up between the users, between the services.
Police gets some too.
Right. Police are the biggest,
Biggest IT.
the biggest IT. But there is some.
and we've been paying a lot of that directly. Haven't we been paying a lot of that directly, not allocating it? The police?
Oh, yeah.
Actually, yeah,
Police IT?
I don't see that there is actually a line item in the police for that.
And technically they should.
So, yeah.
Say
It
more
should be
server
broken
needs.
out because to
Yeah.
be fair about it, they are a lot, they have 2 servers.
They
and
do,
spend
yeah.
a
So
lot.
then
Right.
that would way down and then it would.
Change the general fund support of it.
So worth looking at, rejuggle the numbers or whatever.
We did change our legal costs because we're anticipating, again, we don't have any contracts due in the budget year.
Right.
So I think it was reasonable to lower that number.
Are you talking about the union?
Yeah, just under professional services is we're sort of.
Can you go back a sec? Are you planning to add a personnel coordinator? That's what that 12,005 is.
So part of it is funded by the.
That's
reduction
HR
of
person.
the EA, the administrative assistant. The other portion will be supported by the town.
Got it.
So
Okay. So that's additional budget.
that's a new.
I think that's a good idea.
I mean, we definitely need it. We need someone who's monitoring all that stuff all the time.
Right.
Who doesn't have, who has the time. to do it.
That 515, 3,800 employee benefits area, I can just tell you that Alyssa has spent more than 50% of her time here trying to clear up questions, problems, billing
Yeah.
issues, incorrect census, incorrect rates with all of our basic benefit programs. So we've had problems in health, we've had problems in dental, we had problems in
Yeah.
lemurs. So
That's
it
right.
has been an across the board.
Is this a half-time coordinator or full-time?
The person would be
You're looking
full-time
at
because they'd be split.
Less than,
50-50.
just under 50,000 or about 50?
Right about 50,
Okay.
right.
I figured you can't get someone full-time on that. Based on these days.
Well,
Okay, thank you.
so those numbers, I think you'll see some significant changes in some of those allocations because of some of the time that Alyssa has spent trying to clear up what the actual program cost should be, and then the people that should have been in those programs, and then making sure that their payroll deductions were corrected. I think we've sent out 30 or 40 adjustments. Some we owed employees money, some employees owed us money. Some people were very happy with us and some people were very upset with us. But I think we finally had everybody right. And so we're at a point now, I think, where I have some confidence in these numbers that she put down going forward. But that took a lot of effort to get to that. And you can see that, just for example, on the health insurance number, you can see that we had to make some large adjustments from the 22 budget. Just allocating things correctly.
Right.
Was the biggest issue. And then changes of beamers, which is nothing that any of us control.
Control anyway, yeah.
That's just based on,
The Fact TV, which
Yes.
is the last outside service one.
yeah,
They only take $1,500 a year. Why do we keep putting it in at 18?
I hadn't actually looked at that line item to see how it was shaking out.
And and now we've got that thing on the
The owl, yeah.
the owl. So
Yeah.
they don't have to have somebody here. So we shouldn't
Well, they
pay that
do.
much.
Well, what they do though, Jigs, is they have somebody that is taking our audio and our feed, and then they're
Oh.
digitizing it, and they're putting it back up on the website. So there is
Okay.
process.
There
They're
is.
just physically located here.
There is somebody monitoring the
Correct.
fax TV line right now.
So,
Okay.
so that's got to continue.
The only thing I
All
can
right.
say is somebody must have been assuming an increase and it just never
The
happened.
number was like added to $1,800 a few years ago, and they've never taken more than $1,500.
Yeah, 'cause that's what's in here, 1,500, right?
Yeah, that's what they actually take it.
Yeah.
And that's, so maybe we should just drop it $300 at this point, unless they come back to us and want more.
Okay.
And so listens the person on back.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm gonna hear about
And then
it.
the last thing that sort of is a large change from year to year is on insurance rates.
Yeah.
And again, Alyssa, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out some of these numbers, why they were allocated the way they were and what the actuals are. So you can see that the number itself hasn't changed dramatically in terms of, it's just how we've allocated some of the costs have been changed accordingly. So I think there's some yellow highlights about that as well. That just, again, we had to go back and do some research and try to figure out how things were allocated within those bills to make sure that they were getting appropriately allocated within the budget. So as a first cut overall, those are the highlight items from the general fund. Everything else is, again, we're not in a contract year, so we'll have our stipulated increases that we've already gone through in terms of our unionized employees. Everything else is pretty much staying status quo. The only new program that we're considering is the addition of that personnel position. And we'll work on, again, tying back a couple of these items that we're still trying to get allocated correctly. So we'll work on that bank interest and a couple other items here, the fact TV. And we'll take a harder look when the police come and the fire come to talk about revenues on their end as well. So I'll make a note that we can make sure we jump into that in greater detail. So that's sort of the initial review of the general fund.
Questions, gentlemen?
More to be done, and again, I think our next March 8th meeting, I believe, is police and fire. So I think they'll be here, and then I think after that is water and sewer. I don't remember our schedule correctly.
I think that, yeah, I have it in my.
Right.
In my house, but I still have that schedule.
But it doesn't mean that we can't go back, and we will. We'll review at each
Yeah, a couple passes.
successive meetings, right? We'll go back and say, all right, we've done this and that. And we'll keep updating the numbers.
I just want to ask, just an overview, the increases to the police and fire chief are your recommendation at this point?
Well, we have yes.
Because we don't have a union agreement. I don't know what their contracts are, so.
Well, the representative members do still have one more year, remember, of our
Mhm.
our existing agreement.
Oh, you mean the
But the
contracts.
non-represented folks. will be-
non-represented, that's what I'm
Right.
talking about, yeah.
That'll be a number we're working on.
Right, that's up to you, so.
You guys are well aware, we've had some changes
Mhm.
and lost some folks and gained some folks, so at least at this point, we're at least in a stable position. So,
That's something these days.
well, it's been a rough ride, that's for sure.
Did you have some, Dix?
No, it sounds reasonable. So, and I'll be back on the 8th. So that's,
Okay.
And I will send you this to your email, Jigs, just so you can have it.
okay, thank you.
Look at that. So we're tracking so far. I was just looking at the dispatch. Their contract comes up, doesn't it? Or is it 22?
She's within the same,
Wyndham, well,
remember we made that conversation, well, on the overall dispatch contract.
right, no, not Renee,
Right,
the Wyndham County Sheriff's.
right.
Expecting that bill to be a little high.
Well, they're buying
All
new
this
buildings, so
stuff
my
last-
guess is you're gonna start paying for that.
Yeah, I saw that.
Unless somebody's, you
Leaving
know,
New Fane, going to Brattleboro.
right. I'm assuming that somehow that will get recaptured.
Well, I mean, it goes up what is it, 3% a year? That was the contract.
I think that's the base rate, right?
3%. But yeah, I won't necessarily, but that was, of course, under the old sheriff, I think. So
Right.
when we first started it. We shall see.
Yeah, it's a pretty heavy line item.
Yeah, New Fane's kind of.
It is, it's a big number.
If they figured to take matters into their own hands and look at.
Would it not be better to
fix
just
that.
hire another person to pick up the hours to do dispatch?
It's a lot more, it's computer, it's the CAD, it's all sorts of other stuff that goes into it. Yeah, it's a lot.
So are we ready to just move on to the,
Budget
Finance?
status report? Sure.
okay, questions on the finance status, budget status report?
And I'll send you that as well, Chris.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Wade? I don't know. Okay, well, I'll give you 2 minutes. I gotta rip through the paper. This dim ambient lighting, it's just wreaking havoc with my eyes.
I'm getting the, you know, it's funny because it worked for the, what do we have, the session here for marijuana?
Yeah,
And then I went tonight and it was,
and here we are.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably make it on the heat since we're talking about the lights.
and the heat was working and now it's off.
Yeah, you see, I'm wearing my gloves.
So, I know,
Yeah,
it's
cold.
back to.
Stefan looks like he's got a glow around him. Oh,
He's radiating heat.
Thank you, Jake.
he's radiating, yes.
It's his best lighting, so that's what he asked for. You can soften the lighting just
Yeah.
a touch.
Which reminds me, I was on the VLCT call, about, H5, well, one of the items was H518, which is the, in the House right now about being able to provide grants
Hmm.
to municipalities to get their carbon footprint reduced and move into alternative sources of energy. So maybe something a little more consistent than what's going on here. But you gotta do some repairs this next fiscal year, right?
Yeah, well, we're still working through. But yeah, this thing is really bad.
Wacky, yeah. Yeah, right.
I don't know.
Public safety on page 4 of 17.
Yep.
Why, they're over $1,000 on their rubbish removal. I understand it seems petty, but at the same time, where's all the trash? Is it from their cleanup? Have they had to rent dumpsters from the repairs and stuff of the building?
Well, part of it is because we've been working in the basement because we've had a water leak in the evidence room. So I had to take some materials out of there, and then I just filed a claim this week with our insurance. And then we'll have to talk about that as we go forward on how we're gonna try to fix that problem, so.
Wow.
There's some mold in that corner of the basement. So, yeah, it's a conversation we're gonna have to have. So it's all related to all that whole issue.
At one point.
Well, I know we have one here in this building, but I don't know about this one.
Different corner.
Different corner.
Different corner.
Same problem, different corner.
Different location.
Yes. Yeah.
That was one that wasn't considered when all the repairs to the public safety building were being,
I had a question, 2 questions on the next page.
Yep.
Page 5 of
5.
17.
Yep.
What's the, I think I might ask this one other time, what's the overtime for fire department?
Is it the,
Fire
it's in the middle of the fire department.
department payroll overtime?
The 435
Yeah.
or the 433?
Yep,
Just this
I know
one
that-
item.
Sean's explained it before.
Why
but
is it
I
different
can't
than
remember,
Right here.
I printed mine today.
because we have no budget.
What am I?
Was it an application?
Oh, I printed mine today. I
Yeah,
don't know why mine's less than this.
These are the these are the 18s that we have. We
Yeah,
have
ours is
today.
21822.
What's yours?
Huh,
222.
so you
She
moved
did an
something, you moved
update.
something?
I don't know. I did not.
Okay,
I only have 292.77 on my.
yeah, but you're the only one who has access to do that, right? So we clearly didn't do it.
Hello.
Well, if that's gone down, that's even better, I suppose.
Yeah.
We'll have to look into it and see what's.
Figure out why, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm just curious
all
what
right,
it
we'll
was.
get back to
Yeah,
you.
well, I know that Sean has explained this line in the past. We probably need a re-explanation of what it is. So we can understand it, because if we're going to do it, we ought to have some money over allocated to the budget, even though we're going to run under budget. So maybe we call firefighter line that's a little bit lower in order to compensate the overtime. I don't know whose overtime it is.
It's gotta be his. He's the only,
He's only full
Only a
time.
salaried employee.
but I'm wondering if it's comp time.
It could be.
That might make sense.
I'm wondering if he took some comp time.
Some you'll ask.
And
the
that
question,
would be
find out.
why it's a little different, because there was an issue and we redid something.
And you,
so-
oh, okay,
But I can just,
That makes sense.
that would make sense.
it's just named overtime instead of comp time because it is overtime. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you come up with any other questions?
That was it for that, for now.
You guys have anything? Hear nothing?
Looking at.
Overtime in the PDs, obviously over, but.
Yep.
It's sort of-
We're expecting that, I suppose.
I think some of that turnover is sort of generated.
Mhm.
It's really related to that employee turnover, to be
Yeah.
blunt about it, and then.
So it's probably gonna get worse or it gets better.
Well, my concern is, and we're gonna talk about this in their budgets, we have some people who are trying to get into the academies, and when you do that, then you have to cover more shifts, and it's like
So it doesn't matter.
We pay special rates of pay for training hours for the training officer and stuff like that. It's in the
Right.
contract, so. They're definitely gonna run over.
Well, Jigsy don't have nothing to look at, does it?
I know, no, we have no
I don't,
papers.
this is a great strategy, Scott.
I love it, do it all the time.
He'll hit me up tomorrow.
Oh, I'm sure we'll have questions once Diggs gets a hold of this.
Oh, yeah.
That
Yeah,
won't be.
yeah.
I'm
I'll
sure
be
we'll-
ready. I'll be ready on the 8th.
Yeah, he'll be
Okay. With a
ready
bunch
to
of
go.
questions. His own piece of the hour, put him on the agenda.
Yeah.
Jigs, yeah. The parks, I always wonder, parks area on page 7 of 17.
Mhm.
The materials and supplies and contract services are going to run over budget, and I'm not sure why. I mean, we didn't gain any more land. We intervened
Is
here,
there something associated with the sheds or something like that?
but we don't own the sheds, do we?
I don't know.
All those are, we lease them to the town.
No, I meant some of the new sheds for like the pump, the pump track or something like that. There was more material.
What page you looking at?
Page 7 of 17, the bottom.
Well, we spent some of that money, when we took one of the sheds from the recycling center and moved it over there and
To the pump track,
to the pump track, and it worked.
but that's town stuff, not village, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's isn't it the Hetty Green Park?
Part of it's Hetty Green.
Well, we have more than that though. Just seems like it's it's high, and
Okay, we'll
by
take
the
it.
time July 1st gets here, we'll be definitely be over budget for the move.
For which line item?
Materials, the parts you're looking at?
Material
Yeah.
supplies, and also the next one,
515.
contract services.
Yeah.
Which I'm assuming is whoever's mowing the lawn.
12, 20, and
Well, the materials and supplies are from J&H Hardware, and they're very small, but then there's one,
Although they add up.
Mutt,
Oh Jesus,
$2,900.
we spent so much money on the mutt nets. Those are the bags, the little
oh,
stations
dog stuff,
for dog stuff.
picking up
That's
dog
all.
waste.
So
Yeah.
that's $2,900.
God, it's crazy how much we spend on those bags. It's insane. And I've asked Brenda more than 1 year in a row, can you give me those dollar figures because of what we spent? Because 1 year it went crazy. 3 different people were ordering bags all at the same time. Some of them were not liked as well as the others, and I don't know what happened to the not liked bags. So what do? Toss them? You spend thousands of dollars on Monday bags. It's just crazy.
Who
So,
puts them out?
the highway department does.
There's various points in time where they're.
They refill and empty the trash.
But we have
That's a
a,
3-year supply.
Yeah,
But so this one line item is just for the bags themselves?
yeah, it's just the bags, honey.
Just a
the
plastic
bags.
bag, so people walk
Yeah.
around that.
Well, some people don't even use them, because when I walk to work, there's always a pile on the
Yep,
bag.
and we have people who will take way more than they need to, or people, or kids who think it's funny to throw them out on the street in the spring, that's
Right.
a hoot. But, yeah, they're kind of expensive. And they're biodegradable, so they break down in the
Right.
sun, yeah. Yeah, so I just wanted, I mean, it's definitely gonna run over, those will run over budget by the time we get to the end of the
Gotcha.
year.
I'll ask Andy if we have some mud bits hanging out somewhere that we can make sure we don't lose track of.
Devil's in the details.
Well, listen, I'm with you.
I think that was really probably all.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Might be questions. Except I noticed some of the figures in water and wastewater, debt service, repairs and things like that are higher than anticipated. Well, they're more than the budget line. So. That could be just because they weren't clear, they were supposed to be early in the fiscal year.
Some of that was because of we went through those updates to the water and debt, sewer and debt services. And
Mhm.
some of it reflects changes that were updated to make it correct. And some of that will be part of our audit as well, when we get into our audit.
Page 11 here says, like, under repairs and maintenance in the water fund, it says water meters, we budgeted $10,000 a year, and my understanding was we were only doing so many per year in order to roll forward, because they're expensive, and we spent $20,000 so far.
Because I think he bought a couple of commercial meters from that as well. Because I
Oh.
think he did, when the Heady Green came on, I think he had to do
Yeah.
a large meter there. I think he's doing a meter at the BF garage. There's a couple other places, so I think he had bought some larger meters.
Okay.
Yeah. Not just the, I know the ones you're talking about, the programmed house, for the radio reach, but these were for
Right.
specific sites.
Yeah, and I can see where, since especially the Heady Green had been underused so long.
In a couple cases too, we had places that one house had multiple accounts, but only one water line. So we
Right,
had done some work to make sure that we had a couple people that were conveniently delinquent, knowing that their neighbor they couldn't get shut off because their neighbor was on the same line. So
right.
we eliminated a couple of those problems, and now those folks
So
are
they're independent.
on a payment plan and catching up.
Yeah.
So it was a good investment.
Wow, those other meters were expensive.
Yeah, they are. They're expensive. Commercial ones are expensive.
Okay, so it looks like we're done with item number 6, financial. So we move on to review agenda item for the next meeting, which is March 8th.
All right, so we have another budget update on the police and fire. I think we had talked about bringing back the housing ordinance,
Mhm.
but I think we were waiting to see what the state was going to do.
Yeah, have they gotten there yet? I don't think so.
I believe it's going to go to the governor. And the
Okay.
question is, what is he going to do with it? The last time they were indicating, at least GLCT was indicating, he's probably going to veto it.
Yeah.
So that seemed to be the understanding.
So then we're basically back to on our own, except at the same time, we can't get that memorandum of agreement
Right, they're.
without,
Correct. So we're sort of stuck. So I think we could put it on for an update, but I wouldn't anticipate you
much of anything.
taking it. forward.
Yeah, the ordinance committee hasn't done anything else either, because we're waiting to hear if there was some update. There's no point in having a meeting with nothing to say.
Right.
Review agenda items for the joint board meeting, which is also was at the
End of the
last
month.
Tuesday in March.
I think, right. We're gonna talk about ARPA at that meeting. We're gonna talk about where we stand on some of the collections for the past due taxes. There's a third thing that we had discussed, and I can't remember what it was. And I've got it written down upstairs.
I think that Saxon's River is anticipating being a participant, according to their agenda.
On the ARPA discussions.
Yeah.
I believe they
Yeah.
wanted to come and talk about.
So that would make it a tri-board meeting, not a
Right.
joint board meeting.
But there was a third item that we had talked about, and I've got it written down upstairs,
Okay,
so.
we will get there. Other business. James, do you have anything?
No, I'm all set.
Okay, great. Wade
I don't think so. I think I'm good.
Jeff, and Stephanie? Okay. And the only thing I would say is I apologize to anyone on Fact who's watching through Fact TV and had to wait 40 minutes to get sound. That was on their end, and I'm sure once they upload this, you'll be able to watch it at the beginning if you feel inclined, for more information on the items that we have at the beginning of our agenda. I think that's it. It's supposed to drop down to somewhere in the vicinity of 13 degrees by early morning or before early morning. With all this rain, it's gonna get slick. Please be careful on the roads. It's gonna be highly slippery.
Yeah, the icy.
Yeah, so there's that. We have no need for an executive session, so I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, so remember, we have to do by hand. So, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Jeff?
Jeff Dunbar, aye.
Stephanie? Deborah Wright, aye.
Wait, Michelle, aye.
Jigs?
Jim McAuliffe, aye.
Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for attending this evening.